This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting off the show is David Schemm, State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, as he chats about the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program and what he is seeing around the Northwest Kansas offices. Tina Sullivan, K-State Extension agronomist, keeps the show rolling by discussing alfalfa and what issues it might be experiencing. The Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster in today's show as they converse about their thoughts on line breeding in cattle. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with an update from the Kansas Farm Service Agency. And in for that update, we have State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
David, what recent announcement did we see when it comes to the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program?
For those producers out there that missed the Secretary's announcement this last Friday, I think it was definitely much welcome news for our producers here, especially in Kansas there, because that Supplemental Disaster Relief Program addressed disaster impacts that producers faced in 2023 and 2024. And as I have mentioned before, unfortunately, Kansas seemed to really, our producers really got affected those years, obviously, by drought impact with those 2 years with losses that they had on that program there. You know, we had for that stage one, Shelby, we had over 60,000 applications across the state. It actually led the nation in the number of applications for STIRP there. And I know many of our producers, when they came in there and they figured up what the payment rate was, what the losses that they had on there, they noted that there was a 35% factor on what they got paid out on stage one there. That was the big news that the Secretary announced here on Friday, was that 35% payment on that stage one will have a top up or a factor put into it now, so that it will now go up to 70%. So essentially, there will be another 35% issued on that stage one, Shelby, for producers that qualified for stage one of the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program.
Do you know when they're expected to receive those payments?
So we're going to be starting to work on those payments here shortly. So Shelby, it should be a really short time frame there as we're working through all of it there. But I would definitely anticipate within the next couple of weeks for those payments to start going out to producers there and everything as we get the final rules and things that we need to on our end. It should be a really easy process. Again, it's just a top up on the payment of that 35%. So really, these producers should see these payments coming out and hitting their bank accounts here in the next couple of weeks.
So I'm assuming for those producers who did fill out the application and got the first 35% for stage one, don't need to do anything else to get that second 35%.
That is exactly right, Shelby. They should already be factored in there, and we should be able to work on it. Again, you know, right now we're getting more clarifications out there. So if producers just want to give us a couple of days here to let us get the information down here to our county offices there. But yeah, from a producer standpoint, where this is just a top up, they're already qualified. Really, they don't need it to come back into the office there. Again, if they have any questions, always feel free to reach out to our offices there. But, you know, this has been definitely a big program that has impacted the state for dollars sent out. You know, $6.7 billion have been sent out on the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program. But Kansas has sent out over $730 million to producers across the state. So obviously, very big impact for Kansas on this, and obviously good news for our Kansas producers out there affected by those disasters that occurred in 23 and 24.
And what extension deadline are we seeing for this program as well?
I'm glad you asked, Shelby. You're dot on there. So we have a stage one and a stage two. Stage two is that shallow loss or quality loss. That sign-up's been going on. That deadline was coming up here just here at the end of April, April 30th. But the secretary, with this top up and everything, decided to go ahead that we needed to extend it, and that is extended until August 12th. So again, producers, if they have not already signed up for stage 1 or stage 2 of that program, they have until August 12th to sign up for that program. Again, any questions, get into that county office and ask them on that. But August 12th is the deadline for sign up on SDRP, the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program.
And mentioning getting into county offices, you are back on your trip around a bit of the state. And where were you at last week?
So I had the opportunity to go up into what we call our District 1 or Northwest Kansas, and I was able to spend the week up there this last week and visited 13 county offices up there, county committees, as well as county employees there. It's always so great to get out there. Obviously, this is kind of in the backyard of my area out there with our operation, but beautiful country. Always good to get out there and visit with those great people out there and get a firsthand, input from both our county committee members and producers, what's going on, as well as our county employees out there. Shelby, I just got to say, I know there's been some rains across the state, but it's dry out there.
And what impacts are you seeing that dryness or per se drought have on those counties?
Well, obviously, and then producers know firsthand with what they're dealing with, but we saw that drought monitor mat expand into D3 and lots of D2, but even that D3 stage there, and, had the opportunity to talk with a lot of producers out there as well as look at a lot of wheat. I got to admit, a lot of concern over the freeze. You talk drought, and then ironically, we talk about freeze. So producers are out there very concerned about wheat that has been able to survive. I got to tell you, Shelby, that wheat out there is pretty short, rough-looking wheat that I've seen out there. They always say wheat has 9 lives, and I think, once again, if it does manage to survive, it's going to take all 9 lives. But definitely, you talk about impact. Producers are concerned about their wheat. I know multiple of them have mentioned that they were having crop insurance adjusters coming out already looking at the wheat to possibly adjust it because they just didn't think it was worth salvaging. And even on the cattle side of it there, we're in the spring season here as those producers there are starting to look at wanting to turn cattle out to pasture, and a lot of concern. And I noted firsthand that these pastures don't have a lot of green in them, and even producers mentioning that if they don't start seeing rain pretty shortly here, they may have to look at some herd reduction just because of the drought there. And obviously, that's a very concern. It's not what our beef industry needs right now with that increase, with already the limited number of stock animals that we have out there. But it does bring me up to the point as well. And again, unfortunately, and we hate when this happens, is that we have county out there that actually qualified for the livestock forage program.
And what is that program?
Helps compensate those producers for loss of forage due to drought there. There has been some changes with the OBA bill on that livestock forage program. So now, in order to qualify, counties to qualify for the livestock forage program there, they just need to be in a D2 status for 4 weeks. Or if they enter into D3, they're automatically qualified for whatever length of time there. So for those producers, again, if you have livestock there, and you've been into D2 for at least 4 weeks, or if you enter into D3, get into those county offices and talk with them on the LFP program. Just up there in that District 1, Shelby, here, we've got 4 counties already up there, Cheyenne, Decatur, Norton, and Rawlins County, that have already qualified for livestock forage program on that there. And, we have 9 total counties across the state that have been in that D2 for at least 4 weeks or D3. So, again, livestock forage program for our producers out there who have livestock. You sure hate to see that this early in the season when we're in the spring season and we're supposed to be getting rains, but obviously not all of the state's getting rain.
And for those qualifications of being in D2 drought for 4 weeks or hitting D3, is there a certain timeline of once they've hit that qualification, they need to come into the office?
Yeah, so need to go in there and check in with the county offices as soon as they can. I think it's about a 60-day time frame when they have to get into those county offices there to question on the LFP. But again, go in there, talk to those county offices there when you do hit that there. Or if you have questions, but even before you hit, doesn't hurt. Double check with the county office, make sure that you got your information.
For programs like the Livestock Forage Program, do you ever see it concentrated towards parts of the state, or is it sometimes throughout the whole state?
Sometimes I wish you could see it. And obviously, with some of the programs, when it is drought related, it can definitely be concentrated in areas of the state that are experiencing drought. But truly, Shelby, sometimes it seems like it is very random across the state for some of those forage or livestock programs there and disaster programs what can hit. Because, there can also be flooding in parts of the area there. There can just be so many different disasters that affect our producers out there when they're facing it there. And so it can be kind of all over the board. Quite honestly, for the offices, great employees. And obviously this last week, being able to engage with our employees is great. And the passion I hear, our producers know, well, and I hear from our producers firsthand, Shelby. I can't tell you, every producer I talk to tells me, well, I've got the best county office out there. So it's always refreshing to hear producers say that there. But sometimes that workload, they want to definitely help our producers. Sometimes you cannot anticipate when that disaster workload will hit our offices. Our offices are obviously more than willing to help out those producers when they do get affected by that disaster. But even offices there sometimes get surprised by disaster programs when they hit.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Always a pleasure, and definitely praying and wishing everybody a safe spring and planting season and time to get the cows out to pasture.
That was State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing alfalfa stands with K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. Tina, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Tina, how are alfalfa fields looking in Kansas?
So the ones I've seen, of course, I cover mainly eastern Kansas. We've been receiving a bit more rain lately, so we think our alfalfa would look better. We've also been kind of getting this yo-yoing of temperatures, those cold snaps we had in March, and even that cold snap earlier in April that has dinged back some of the alfalfa and some other symptomology that would be more considered with insect pressure, but we're not finding insects in the field. It's kind of leading to this hodgepodge of what is going on in this alfalfa stand, whether it's a newly established stand that was planted this past fall or, a more established longevity stand. We're seeing a mixed bag of symptomologies.
And so what are some potential causes of these issues you're seeing?
For some of the issues, the symptomology may look the same across the issues, right? If we're seeing yellow or stunted alfalfa, whether it's across the field or more patchy, it could be drought, or it could be waterlogged soils, and some of those areas have been kind of being consistently hit by storms. Or it could be a nitrogen deficiency, which we usually don't think about alfalfa having a nitrogen deficiency. They have rhizobia bacteria to help fix their own nitrogen. But in some of those stands of mixed stages, we've been seeing limited nodule formation where those rhizobia live. There's limited rhizobia. They're not fixing nitrogen, thus yellowing of plants, but also yellowing, stunting of plants can be symptomology for a sulfur deficiency or even a boron deficiency. Thankfully, these are not typically the symptoms of insect or disease. For insect or disease, we need to actually look at the plant. For a disease, we'd cut the stem open. If it's white, it's usually good. If it's brown and mushy, that would be a disease or even cold damage. So the brown mushiness after a hard freeze, the cells have busted open and they're not going to recover. So sometimes it's disease, sometimes it's cold damage. And then there's the fun insects of alfalfa weevil. Most of our alfalfa stands in Kansas have some level of weevil pressure in them, just kind of how Kansas works. We're going to have bugs, and this year it was really warm. Those cold snaps did push back those populations, but they ramped up almost just as quickly because it's been just so warm, and insects run off of heat units as well. I've seen stands where we looked at it, we started looking at the plants, they were brown, which can sometimes mean symptomology for those weevils because they're chewing down the plant. Others, it's been actually the symptomology post-freeze damage, where the plant just hasn't recovered. But if we dig up the crowns, or what's the below ground material, you'll see new shoots coming off. So it's been this weird mixed gamut of what is going on with alfalfa stands, whether it's a whole stand that's showing symptoms, patches, or even kind of swaths of where the cold settled if it's kind of a hillier terrain. So mixed bag of what we're seeing in alfalfa stands. And this year it kind of feels like alfalfa, especially in the east, because I don't look at the ones out west, are being hit on the nose this year.
For those fields that are newly established, could there have been a planting issue?
Could be, right? It's hard to say for sure if that was a planting issue. Alfalfa seed's already pretty expensive, so we would believe that it should have been inoculated properly and then planted at the correct depth and time. Previous fall was a little dry, little warm. Could that have affected things? Potentially. And some stands I've seen, part of them have come up really well. They look really nice, but just right next to it in the patch, it's half the size and stunted. And there's not a soil difference in that field. So some of the symptoms, it's kind of this complex, compounded situation of what is driving this issue, right? And if we looked at those big plants versus the little plants and ones that are kind of growing the way you're supposed to versus stunted, we split them open, did not see any browning that would suggest disease or cold damage. Yet when we started looking at the roots on either plant, good or bad, there was no nodulization. So what happened with the bacteria over the winter? Sometimes it's a hard story to be like, what's happening here? We don't know. And if your rhizobia aren't doing their job, aka the nodules are dead or that's not even there, it's going to be a pretty long, sad alfalfa stand because they're not fixing their own nitrogen. And alfalfa would then need applications of nitrogen, and no one wants to apply nitrogen in this fertility market.
Tina, you mentioned soil, and so is that something, if they are seeing issues, they should be checking?
Soil, if you're taking a soil sample, it is going to give us at least part of the story. If there seems to be a pattern in the field, taking a soil sample from the good versus the bad will help. You can do tissue sampling for alfalfa to see what's going on within the plant. It's always taking the uppermost trifoliates on that plant. So the 3 leaves that look like a clover, the uppermost trifoliates. Most of our alfalfa should not be in bloom yet. It's been warm pushing it ahead, but we should not be close to blooming yet. So kind of still those upper trifoliates, and that's going to tell us what's going on inside the plant. Even digging up a couple plants and observing that root material, a nodule is going to look like a little circle, like a little nub on it. If you split it open, just like soybeans, if it's red to pink inside, it's alive. If it's white to brown, it's dead. So there's some diagnostic tools you can do in the field yourself. If your stand's been hit by those cold fronts that we've had, you can dig up the plant and just see what material is alive and what material is dead. Because I went to a stand, it'd been about a week and a half after that cold. A lot of the above ground material, brown, crisped off, dead, right? We dug up a plant, looked below ground, and there was new shoots trying to come out of that crown. So it was recovering. Looking at your stand, I don't like to say if it's looking bad this time of year to terminate because we're kind of outside that window to even do a replant. If you're going to kind of keep limp a stand along, kind of get through this season, our better window will be the plant in the late summer, early fall. But as always with alfalfa, it does naturally thin itself out. It's allelopathic, so it puts out chemicals over time. It thins itself out. If you've been in a stand that's been established for more than 1 year, you need to let the field rest. I would like to say a year to make sure that allelopathy flushes out. Because if you plant directly right after an alfalfa stand, your seed will not come up.
For alfalfa growers, if their field is looking a little patchy, of some really good spots and some not so great spots, should they go ahead and swath it? And then will those parts that maybe don't look so great come back up next year, or will it be done?
So it depends, right? We swath alfalfa numerous times a year. We can get 2 to 3 cuts a year. Kind of depends on that rain pattern, right? If we see a rough stand that first cutting and we cut it back, it can promote better growth. That's kind of how alfalfa works. You cut it off and it says, oh, we can grow again, right? So depending on what resources are there, if it's kind of maybe been dry or hit really hard with insects such as weevils, cutting it off will encourage that new growth. But if we go into a drought or extreme heat, clearly it's not going to pop up as well. And thinking about those age of those stands is also what's affecting that longevity, right? Yes, alfalfa thins itself out over time, but also you got to think about that root biomass below ground. A newer stand is going to have less roots and more shallow roots at that, compared to an older stand that can go down to 6 to 8 feet. Which one's going to have a better resource reserve, right? And we have to talk about it briefly, but last year, a lot of alfalfa stands in the east got hit with fall armyworms. So it's not just the alfalfa weevil we're dealing with. We're dealing with the fall armyworm. We're dealing with true armyworms. We're going to continue to have insect pressure on those stands. So trying to time your cuttings appropriately, yes, for the forage value. We always want to produce as high quality alfalfa as we can. But then we also have the lovely addition of the insects over time throughout the season.
Tina, what would be your checklist then for growers if they're going out to check their alfalfa field and are wanting to see maybe what's the issue? What should they work through?
When you're going to go look at your field, you need to look for, vigorous plants. Are we growing? Are we stunted? Are we dark green? Or are we light green? Are we going into that yellow category, right? Are we brown and crispy? Or are we green and upright growth? Insect damage, especially weevil damage, is going to look like little insects are chewing on the leaves and defoliating the plant from the top down, right? Sometimes a patchiness in a field, thinking about whether it's been super wet or super dry, could be following a soil type difference. And then also could be driving some fertility differences. Alfalfa becomes a complex monster of what's going on in that field. Looking at the number of plants, whether it's crowns or shoots, in your field is going to also determine how well that stand is going to perform. More plants per square foot, more crowns or more shoots, you have more biomass. If you're beginning to thin out more and more, less than 5 plants per square foot, your stand's not going to do super great because it's just not going to be as competitive with weeds. Weeds are going to move in. You're just not going to get as much alfalfa either. And if you're becoming pretty weedy in alfalfa, you're decreasing your forage quality as well.
Tina, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
No worries, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. I will link an Agronomy e-update article on this topic in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of a Beef Cattle Institute Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster.
From a listener, and he talked about line breeding. So essentially they had 2 champions, a bull and a heifer, and line bred them, which ended up with a bull that maybe not what they hoped. So he turned out to be not as good a looking bull as what they expected from those 2. And the question is, he should still have the genetics of these 2 champion male and female. So if I breed him, will I end up with all of a sudden I've got champions again?
Well,
does that make sense, Bob?
Yeah, I understand what you're asking. And I'm going to I hate to say I know because I don't, because genetics, one of the things about genetics, they resort and you never know what you're going to get. But the concept of line breeding are breeding relatively closely related individuals with the idea being that, if they're really good individuals, that you'll end up with a lot of really good individuals, has actually been tried several times. Probably the most famous is in the Hereford breed at the USDA research station at Miles City, Montana, starting about 90 years ago in the mid-30s. They attempted to do line breeding of about 14 different lines, 14 different groups of closely related individuals. And what we found from that experience was really one of the lines actually did pretty well. The rest of them did not. They had poor fertility. They did not, poor performance, poor fertility, just abandoned pretty quickly. With the line that was successful, again, it took a lot of years and a lot of generations, and they had to be very strict. They had to very strictly cull any of these dinks and keep their inbreeding coefficient relatively low. So, yes, they were line bred, but pretty low in comparison. So I'm not very much, because of that experience that was done, and I appreciate people doing the work, I'm not very sold on attempting to get superior offspring by breeding closely related superior parents. I think you're a lot better off breeding superior parents that are unrelated to each other. You get some, if you're going outside the breed, you get heterosis even within a breed. I think a better strategy is, yes, pick outstanding adults to be parents, but unrelated.
And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but as you said, you might pick unrelated. Does the relation mean if I have a recessive trait, they both may carry it, and then if I go to the offspring, they may get that double recessive, which is then an issue? That's a simplistic understanding of where I'm thinking. Philip?
Yeah, so I mean, you think about it's all a probability. So if both parents are carrying it, the probability of getting that genetic mutation that you don't want, that genetic defect, I guess a better word, is higher. And so the more you're line breeding the same genetics, the higher the probability of getting some of those genetic defects, which is why we have that inbreeding coefficient that we calculate to try to look at that, and you're trying to minimize the probabilities. Like Bob was saying, they had some pretty high culling criteria as far as getting rid of any genetic defects that showed up phenotypically, and they tried to keep that inbreeding coefficient really low so that they minimized the chances of getting those genetic defects.
Yeah, and I think if I would summarize what you guys are saying is family trees should have branches.
Family trees should have branches.
Yeah. Okay. So I think to answer his question, the probability of you getting a superior phenotype from breeding that less than desirable bull is pretty low. And it's going to take lots of generations if you ever are able to successfully get superior animals out of that line.
Good question, and we don't know the answers to all those, but we're dealing with probabilities, as Philip just said, and the probability seems low.
Once again, that was the Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster. If you'd like to hear this full Cattle Chat podcast, you can do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by searching for Cattle Chat on your favorite podcast platform. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.